What's going on, everybody? American Football Network here with another video today. And today we're bringing you our Oregon Ducks preview prediction video. But before we get started, make sure you guys like and subscribe. Help us hit that goal of 1,000 subscribers by the end of August. We are almost there. College football is just right around the corner, a little bit less than 3 weeks away. So I'm sure a lot of you guys are very excited about that. Make sure you guys check out our shop. With the link is in the description. I'll tag some products below this video, and the link can also be found on my channel page on my quick links to the top right of the page. Also on the store part of the store tab on my page. So you can find that stuff there. But let's go ahead and get started with today's video. So the Oregon Ducks last year in Dan Lanning's first season as head coach, 10-3 overall, 7-2 in the Pac-12. Got curb stomped week 1 by Georgia, 49-3, but kind of cruised after that. Beat Eastern Washington, kind of took out their anger in week 2, 70-14. And then they beat BYU 41-20 at Washington State, picked up a win 44-41. Beat Stanford at home 45-27, went on the road to Arizona, won 49-22, got UCLA at home and won 45-30, won at Cal 42-24, at Colorado 49-10, then went to Washington, got Washington at home and lost that game 37-34, dropped a close one there. Then the next week they follow it up by beating Utah at home 20-17. Then went on the road to Oregon State, lost that one 38-34 in a close one of the better rivalry games of the season this year is in terms of just pure entertainment. It was one of the better ones, very back and forth. And then in the bowl game, the Holiday Bowl against North Carolina, they picked up a win 28-27. So a solid season for Oregon last year. They returned quarterback Bo Nix. That is the big key for them to get him back. They returned Bucky Irvin, who ran for over 1,000 yards last year. They returned Troy Franklin at receiver, who had about 900 yards receiving. And then on the defense, they returned 6 starters, 2 on the D-line, 2 at linebacker, and 2 in the secondary. So Oregon definitely has some pieces they need to replace, but I think they're in a good spot heading into the season. So let's go ahead and jump into the schedule. Week 1, they get Portland State at home. I have this game as a win. Obviously, Portland State is not going to be able to compete with a team, one of the better Power 5 teams, a team that's going to be a top 15 team. They can't compete with that. Then they go on the road to Texas Tech. I have this game as a win, but be cautious. This is a game that they could definitely lose. Texas Tech could pick up a win in this game, especially week 2 at Texas Tech. But I do think the Oregon Ducks will get the win over the Red Raiders of Texas Tech. Then they get Hawaii at home. I have this game as a win. Hawaii, a lower team. They're not going to be able to compete with Oregon. I see this game kind of like the Eastern Washington game last year, 70-14 in favor of Oregon. I think the Hawaii game will be similar. We see what Vanderbilt did to Hawaii last year and what they'll do to them in week 1, or I guess week 0 this year. And it was not pretty, to say the least, and I expect the exact same thing to happen here. So, I'm not expecting a lot out of Hawaii this year. So another win for Oregon, pretty easy win, their 3rd of the season so far in as many games. Then they get Colorado at home. I have this game as a win. I'm not buying the hype on Colorado. I'm not going to sit here and tell you how Colorado is going to win 8 games this year. That's just not going to happen. Colorado is more of a 3 or 4 win team. They've got some talented players, but that it just doesn't matter. They're not going to be able to put all that together in 1 year and go from winning, I think it was 1 game last year to winning 8, 9. I've seen a few people say 10 games when they 1-11 last year, beat Cal 20-13. That's all they did was beat a 4-8 Cal team by 7. So I'm just not buying it that they're a 9-1 team. I think Oregon is much better, and I think Oregon will win similarly to what they did last year. Now, I think Colorado will score more than 10 points, but I think that the game will still, be a 20 plus point win most likely for Oregon. I see two touchdowns at the least. So it's not a game I'm worried about. I wouldn't be stressing about it if you are an Oregon fan. Then they go on the road to Stanford. I have this game as a win. Now that Colorado has Dion and they're going to win, a few games this year, I think it's safe to say Stanford is probably the worst team in the Pac-12. Either them or Arizona State. One of those two is going to be the worst. And so Oregon's going to have no trouble here. With Stanford being on the road, I see a similar outcome as last year, 45-27, something like that. Not really worried about this game. Then they go on the road to Washington, the first real big game. Texas Tech could be a big game, could be one that they lose for sure. But the first real big game that Oregon plays is at Washington. I have this game as a loss. I think the four teams, USC, Oregon, Washington, Utah, particularly Oregon, Washington, and Utah are going to absolutely beat up on each other throughout the season. I think that all three of those teams will probably finish with, two or three losses, one to three losses. I think USC might be a little bit better, but they have a little bit more of a favorable schedule. They get Utah and Washington at home. They do have to go to Oregon, but we'll get to all that later on in the video. But with Washington, I think Washington is a very dangerous team. Obviously, they beat Oregon last year by 3 at Oregon. I think with this season, Oregon loses a little bit. I like what Washington returns a little bit more than I like what Oregon returns. I like that this game is at Washington. So I'm giving Washington the win. I think it's going to be close. I think it's between 3 and 7 points, 10 at the most. And that's if Oregon, has a late turnover late in the game, something like that. And mop up time that Washington gets, a few more points. But it's going to be a close game for sure. It's going to be a very fun game to watch, a very entertaining game. It's going to be one that's talked about a lot across the country for sure. Bring some attention to that one for sure, because it's going to be a very fun and just entertaining game to watch. But I do have to give the win to Washington, so loss there for Oregon. Then they get Washington State at home. I have this game as a win. Washington State, they have a few years every now and then, where they're a pretty good team, but for the most part, they're just your average 5-7 to 7-5 type team. And I think that, you got to be better than that to beat Oregon, especially at Oregon. I think Oregon wins this game, and I don't really expect it to be too close. I expect it to be a little bit more of a margin than it was last year when Oregon went to Washington State and won 44-41. I expect it to be a little bit better than that, but nonetheless, a win's a win, and I think Oregon's going to get the win here. I think they win this game by 10 plus points this year. I like what Oregon returns and Washington State loses some key guys. Then they go on the road to Utah. Again, much like the Washington game, I love what Utah brings back. I think they bring back probably the best defense in the Pac-12. Washington may have the best defense. One of those two teams, which just makes it even more tough for Oregon. Either Washington or Utah is going to have the best defense in the Pac-12 this year. I tend to slightly lean Utah, but, I could see either way. And this game is at Utah. I love what Utah brings back offensively as well. Utah's kind of had Oregon's number in a little bit until last year. But I think on the road at Utah, I have to give the Utes the win. I think that these two teams are pretty similarly even, especially when you get to this point in the year. With that game at Utah, I'm giving the Utes the win. Then Oregon gets Cal at home. I have this game as a win. I don't think Cal is a team that can really push Oregon. Last year at Cal, Oregon won 42-24. I expect a similar outcome in this one. Don't really see California as a team that can push the Oregon Ducks. Then they get USC at home. I have this game as a win, though. I think that Oregon is going to be able to attack that weak defense of USC. I think that Oregon's defense is built on speed. I think that they are I think that they're more of a team that can really contain Caleb Williams better than the other two. I like Mateo Uyunglele at defensive end, speed rusher, getting off the edge in this game, being able to cause some problems. So, I think that this is going to be a game that Oregon wins. It's a home game for them. It's going to be a tough environment for the Trojans. And I think that they can contain Caleb Williams enough to get the win, but it's going to be a very close game. Very, very close game, much like Utah and Washington was last year. Then they go on the road to Arizona State. This is a win. I have this game as a win. I don't think there's really much discussion like we talked about with Stanford. It's between Stanford and Arizona State for the worst team in the um, Pac-12, and so I don't think Oregon will have any trouble in this game. Then they get Oregon State in the rivalry at home. I have this game as a win, but I think this is going to be another very close game. I could see a 4-point win for Oregon or Oregon State, like the Oregon State won last year. I think this game could go either way. I'm giving it to Oregon because it's a home game, but I wouldn't be surprised either way who wins this game. I think it's going to be a very fun game to watch. I think it's going to be a very entertaining game. I think it'll be very close, but I am giving the win to the Oregon Ducks. But that wraps up Oregon's schedule. I have them going 10-2 overall, 7-2 in the Pac-12. That has them good for fourth in my rankings. Whenever I've done the other teams, Washington and Utah, I have all three of those teams at 10-2. I have with Washington beating Oregon and Utah, so that puts them above both of those teams, and I have Utah beating Oregon, so that puts them above Oregon. So, and USC coming in first, but I do have Oregon beating USC, so good win there for the Ducks. Another good season for Dan Lanning, and he's building something pretty good over there at Oregon. But that wraps up today's video. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed it. Comment your thoughts and opinions down below, and we'll